So I would like to welcome you to the Stockbridge Library, Museum, and Archives online poetry series. We are in season 3 with a theme of inquiry. And we are being led today by John Gillespie, who started this program back in the height of the pandemic and has kept weekly poetry readings going for 3 years and counting. John, thank you so much. And I'm delighted to have poet Theresa Wyatt joining us today. Theresa is joining us from the Buffalo area. She is the author of Hurled into Gettysburg, and her poems have appeared in the Norton Anthology, New Micro, Pulse, Spillway, Steel Bellow, the Medical Literary Messenger, Wolf Ridge Press, and elsewhere. She was a finalist in the Best Small Fictions and Prime Numbers Award for Poetry in 2017. And Theresa has also made several appearances in the Healing Muse Journal, which is SUNY's Medical University in Syracuse journal. And 2 of her poems were featured on their Health Link on Air radio program. Theresa, what an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you.
And welcome to all of our guests. And I would like to turn the program now over to you, John, and you, Theresa.
My computer is now, there we go. Yeah, my computer sometimes has its own mind, but no, Wendy, thank you for, and the Stockbridge Library for hosting and producing our program. Hold on a second, don't worry, you'll see me soon, yeah. Theresa, thanks for reading today. So we start off for our audience. Let us know, what does inquiry mean to you?
Well, John, I know you always start off with that question. So yesterday I was doing the self-examination that comes with inquiry and preparation and asking me, what am I going to say tomorrow? How could I try to say something new? I've listened to many of the recordings about this. But before I answer your question, and it's a small group today, but in case people do tune in on the YouTube, I want to thank both of you and congratulate both of you. I did that when we chatted a little on keeping on 3 years of this program. Also, I want to thank the Buffalo contingent that's here, Perry and Irene and Vanilla, who led me to your show, John and Wendy. So I'm grateful for that. And I wanted to start with that. But what inquiry means to me, I really think it's fundamental. It's fundamental to my writing process, and also coupled with close at hand in that discussion is curiosity, being inquisitive, almost living in a state of inquisitiveness. So much so that you can define it as an urge, that puts you on the quest, that helps you arrive at your subject matter. So I've asked myself that many times, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, in terms of, is it the curiosity leads you to the question, or is it the question that leads you to being more curiosity? So inquiry's that blank page. I think it's for an artist, I think it's the blank canvas. For the musician, it could be just picking up the instrument or composing. I really do think it's part and parcel. It's a personality trait almost, I think, to put yourself on these paths of inquiry. Gives the poet, the writer, the musician, it's the quest, just constantly making observations and then taking it from there. I also think inquiry can be, leads to poems that can become vicarious for other people. For example, well, I'm thinking about travel poems, for example, or poems that explore, let's say I wrote a poem about windsurfing one time, just because I was attracted to the colors, and I live close to the lake. I was attracted to the colors of the that the windsurfers have in their clothing and the sails themselves. So I just pulled over and wrote a poem about that. So it was the color that attracted me in that type of poem. It wasn't a question, it was the color. So I have a background in art, so that leads me, some of the processes, is the same: organization, imagery, and so on. But getting back to the inquiry part, definitely I see that quest as being the asking questions of oneself in an interior way. For example, emotions, feelings, dreams, that type of poem, internal to the external, of asking questions of your world, of what's going on, the environment, pollution.
Well, I think
The
I'm going to
earth,
vote for.
the
I
natural
think I'm going to
world.
vote. Sorry about that. I think I'm going to vote that instead of questions lead to curiosity, I think your curiosity leads you to questions. If you're stopping on the side of the road because there are some colors that enhance you or attract you, or if you're seeing the Stockbridge, Mass sign, decide to pull off the road. So there's a,
It's
I'm
true.
sure there's, a question that comes around, but I think I'll give you an example. It's funny. There's an article in something, I don't know, Wall Street Journal, some places. The number one trait, if you have a child, should be curiosity. They should be completely curious about everything in the world, and everything happens. That is the number one. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure if I read another article, they'll probably say it's if you're 7 foot tall or something because you can play basketball. But curiosity is very, I think, one of the core elements. So let me ask you this: so the question part, and we always ask this of everyone also, when you're writing your poetry, do you start with the question, or do you start with the curious part and then a question emerges? It may be both. I just want to understand, how does that question thing evolve for you?
Well, John, it's both. And I remember that quote that you gave about parents and the curiosity. I think you said it was from the New York Times.
Yeah.
And that caught my attention. But I basically write, to answer that, I basically write from two impulses or perspectives. The one is, I write where the question might be, I write from what I know, often the lived experiences, my own experiences, and then what I like to write about. So number one is I write from what I know. I'm not so sure that a lot of questions come from that, as much as when I find that the second impulse for writing for me is to write about what I don't know. And that certainly is evident in some, that's more like project work. That was like my Gettysburg project. So writing from what you don't know, I think in taking any workshop courses or classes, or having Irene and Perry, I know your professors, that it might be the suggestion to write what you know to get someone started. And that was certainly the case for me, especially when I did get into the medical narratives, when I got back into writing later on after I retired. But often, and the writing from what I don't know, that's where all the questions in a formal way, for example, researching things. Also the poetry of eulogy. Like today I'm going to read a poem about John Greenleaf Whittier because it's also Black History Month. And he was from the great state of Massachusetts there, where Wendy is. And I thought that in a case like that, the curiosity comes, I might find something came up in some research I was doing that mentioned Whittier. And so then I had a lot of questions about him. And that led to another question. I've heard people on the program say that, that one question leads to one and another. So I think it's a bit of both, John, but I think more where questions come are when I find I don't know a whole lot about either the person I'm writing, if it's historical. And in that sense, it's a little more difficult for me because I'm always fact checking, dates. If I certainly historical poems, I want to be sure I've got their names spelled right. Where were they born? When did they live? That sort of thing. And then in the case of eulogy or honoring them, the questions come, why is it the question for me comes, why is it I want to spend my time on this person, place, or thing? So it's both, John. And I've heard you mention that or ask that of everyone. And certainly the couple of questions you asked, which might appear simple to begin with, I had to really think about them in a little more deeply than I normally would.
Yeah. So why don't you read a couple poems for us?
Okay, will do. If I could just say one thing before I read some of the poems. Your theme is which is inquiry, the power of poetry. I think I actually can speak to the power of poetry more than a few other things, but I think a real power in poetry lies for me in the freedom. I can get up and there's that blank page in front of me every day or when I choose to write. And there are very few aspects in our life, I think, where you have just that total freedom and control, choice, where you're given choices of what you want to write about. And then hopefully the power is that you can enthuse another person or guarded their interest through transferring whatever it is you have written about. And your poet last week from the Virginia Women's Collective, but they were the one poet who wrote from trauma. That's a catharsis type of writing. And so I think we're always hoping that we can build empathy or curiosity about something. But I will go on with the poem, which illustrates, the poems I chose today illustrate the questioning. And I took a poetry workshop with the poet Gregory Orr a few years back. And he showed us or flashed on the screen one day, Gauguin's painting, big mural type painting, 4 feet by 8 feet I believe it is, his painting, which the title is, Where Do We Come From? What Are We? And Where Are We? It was a big epic mural painting that Gauguin did. He wanted to leave that as a legacy. And so that was posed to us as a prompt. And I just want to say I tended to stay away from prompts a lot of times or constraints, but this poem would not have resulted if it wasn't for him posing that to us and telling us or telling us to challenge ourselves to write a poem, who are you or where do you come from? And this is called Genealogy. We were never blank slates. rather slates filled with words from newspapers, births, weddings, wins and losses, wars and maps, hospital notes, obits. Mighty are a man's forefathers and collective spirit. In Chicago, they reversed a river. Michelangelo carved God. Somewhere, a woman in her 60s is giving birth to twins. A 5-year-old is saving his sister. A mother shows her children where to jump in case of fire. One day in 62, my father kept me home from school, lifted me up to Van Gogh's Sunflowers in Buffalo during record crowds. My mother learned to drive. We watched Ed Sullivan on Sunday nights. Where did I come from? I came from an orphanage in Sicily. My grandmother's sewing and rosaries told me so. Songs from sulfur mines played in my head before being heard. I came from a town in Abruzzi where sun and shade paints guitars of old men singing and selling wine by the tracts. I sit al fresco whenever I can, watching basil and parsley spring up from glazed terracotta. Below the surface, eggshell and chicken bones enriching the soil.
Wow. There's a journey.
Yes, there's a journey there that's probably about as long as my poems get. But again, in tying this to the theme and where the epigraph line would go is the title of Gauguin's painting. Where do we come from? Who are we? What are we? And again, that's coming from a prompt to ask oneself that. So, yeah. First couple of poems do have, I took your theme to heart and do have questions in them, most of them.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one I'm going to read is, even though that had an art aspect to it, this next poem is what I would call a pure ekphrastic poem, not just a couple of references here and there. And the title of the poem is Postmaster Roulin, Postmaster Joseph Roulin, which is a person, again, John here, is it the curiosity of the question, which comes first, or where do I start with? Many, many years ago, I saw my first relationship with a Van Gogh movie was Kirk Douglas's Lust for Life. And I notice every time there's a film with Van Gogh or some new slant on it, that Postmaster Roulin, who lived on the same street as Van Gogh in the Arles period, let's say about 1887, 1888, does a walk-on. He always has like a walk-on. And you have to search the credits to see who he is. But he, in Lust for Life, Kirk Douglas is sort of stumbling down the street, and I hear this man in a uniform that I could see is a postal type person, ask him how he's doing, and they say hello and all of that. So I became so enthralled with him when I found out that the relationship with Joseph Roulin and Van Gogh was an important relationship. He did over 20 portraits of the postmaster, and Roulin, his wife and his family, he did it. Roulin, I think, was ahead of his time in recognizing that Van Gogh had something at that time. And he also visited him when Van Gogh was in the psychiatric place, and he visited after Roulin moved from the town. He continued to visit him. So that was a very, very close friendship. And I don't know. Here's a one that he did. The poem that I wrote from was a full portrait that I saw in the Barnes Museum in Philadelphia. And I was surprised how small the portrait was. It was tucked in a corner, and I couldn't get way to that room. But here is the poem from that.
Yeah, he looks like a sea captain, with his button-down jacket and his little hat on. Or maybe that was just the style at the time.
John, interestingly enough, I just read this the other day. Rouland's wife implied, or when she was, they had some reporting done on, after Van Gogh's death. The postmaster was known to almost live in his uniform. It's very
so
impressive.
It's a postmaster. Oh, it's a postmaster's uniform. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
He was the postmaster. It's this navy, these gold buttons and like this braid and the cap and the hat. And it's been reported that his wife said, I don't even know why Joseph he can't sit still. I don't know why he's able to sit still for all of these. So very intriguing to me. So that's all the curiosity and questions there. Was it his beard that prompted loading the brush with swirls and dashes? Rock solid easy in his double-breasted navy coat with gold buttons. He was a gentle friend beside the melancholy one. I picture his wife walking in gingerly, brushing lint from sturdy shoulders, adjusting his postal cap with pride, thinking, he sees what I see. Warm, milky eyes blink dignity. Believe this crazy, rough artist of a man might just have something, know something, reveal something that will keep him alive for years to come.
Nice, very nice.
Thank you.
Want to dive into another poem?
I'm sorry, John.
No. I was going to say, go ahead and read another poem, and then we'll have the Buffalo crew, rate you. If you could put up, Perry, 1 finger, 2, 3, 4, it could be 10. No, I'm kidding. It'll start a new part of our show. It'll be like The Price is Right or something. Or Perry, anybody remember Queen for a Day?
Yes.
Oh God, remember those poor women in those old house coats or whatever, and the applause meter, and if you had the most applause, you get like a new dishwasher or something. Yeah, that was my early childhood education. 1950s TV. Perry's going, that explains it now. That explains it.
No.
Yeah, Theresa, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, listen, I appreciate the Buffalo connection showing up here. And I believe there are many people named Rose, but I believe this is my sister Rose is here today from New Hampshire. So, John, that'll be the next poem. That'll be a good place. I know you like to break because that finishes off the art ekphrastic part of the poem. So I have one more in the ekphrastic travelogue vein. And again, it arose from my fascination with cigar box art and cigar box companies' lithograph artwork labels that they had. And this resulted from a trip that my husband and I made to Tampa in 2018. Actually, I had attended the American Writers, the Writers Conference there. And so this is the postcard. It's titled Tampa Girl, and it's a lithograph artwork. And I'm fascinated by the artwork from walking around Ybor City. Ybor City, if you've been to Florida, you've probably been there around the Tampa area, is northeast of Tampa. And it was the city founded by Vicente Martinez Ybor, who became the wealthy cigar and baron entrepreneur. So we took a walking tour there, which was excellent. And I really felt like I was almost in another country there. And here it goes. The Ybor City postcard, the walking tour. There is something about this scene where Tampa girl rests on the docks in a dreamy pose against a barrel. Palm trees to the west, a steamboat to the east. It makes me wish I sold Cuban cigars. The label reads, The Antonio Company, very mild, 5 cents. Above the words made in Tampa, a simple cat crowns her hair, braided yet regal, as if this smoky history depends solely on her, flows through her red dress. And I wonder who tried to shift her glance, unlock the pose, earn her thoughts. Was it someone who worked 6 days a week at the factory, paid by the bundle, saving up money for bracelets, skipping breaks, hoping to make extra payments on the shotgun casita next to her parents, hoping she'd keep his photo in the locket he gave her forever, maybe give up the dancing. With hopes like that, no wonder she sells out, looking cool and calm, craving to be cherished and carefully placed in a frame.
Very nice,
So
very nice.
Thank you. I looked long and hard for a Tampa Girl t-shirt, but they were all sold out. So that that reality of that particular artwork being sold out, I thought I'd focus on that.
Yeah, neat. So as you know, we have a little break and we encourage the audience, which obviously is the Buffalo Poetry Association, to ask you questions or comments. And I think Rose is your Rose, Theresa. She sends something in the chat box. So she goes, it's me, Rose. So I think that's your Rose.
Okay, thanks, Rose.
So
my sister always sends me good wishes before these things. She knows I get a little nervous.
So anybody, Irene, questions, comments? Patricia, Perry, Rose?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Theresa, in the next segment, might you read some poems from Heraldon to Gettysburg?
Oh, yes. That's coming next.
Okay. I mean, that to me really exemplifies inquiry. It's fantastic how you imaginatively placed yourselves in another yourself. See yourselves, I said, because there are many selves speaking in that wonderful collection, and you are able to embrace perspectives from different people, different ages, different backgrounds, and it's so thoughtful and so imaginative.
Thank you, Irene. Also, what individual people who may listen later may not know is that Irene did this phenomenal blurb for me on the back of the book, which even just her blurb made me think again. So here is the cover of the book, which has the it is from the Library of Congress photograph by Alexander Gardner, who was a protege of Matthew Brady. And Alexander Gardner went on to be Lincoln's one of Lincoln's primary photographers at the time. And choosing, in writing books, I'm not a prolific writer, so I have few books. But and before I did, Irene did a wonderful blurb for me on the back, which you graciously read at the Buffalo Corner series last year. But that's an example. And Irene, you mentioned Gettysburg and asked me if I'm going to read those. That's an example of me writing for what I didn't know. The research went on for just engaged me, and I spent hours and hours on it. I have many Gettysburg books. I looked at lots of Gettysburg, anything I can find on Netflix and so forth. And it was my quest to want to tell some of the civilian stories. I felt that soldier stories, and not to minimize that, I think of Ukraine, war is war. At the time at Gettysburg, though, there wasn't TV in this immediate sense of what's happening when a war is going on. I think the first time that happened was Vietnam, when there was that push to, you could see on your screen and on nightly news what was happening. So Gettysburg, often I find history books of a little bit further back are from if I may say, a masculine military perspective. And when I went to Gettysburg, it's almost, I'm embarrassed to say this, it was one of the first times in the town I said to myself, wow, what were the people doing? What were the residents? What were a lot of the men had left the town, but what were the women? What were the African-American people of the town? What were the children, teenagers? What was all going on here? 160,000 troops from both sides descended on a town that's probably at the time population is the size of Williamsville. And John, I say that because of the Buffalo contingent will know what I'm speaking about. So there were so many stories to be mined from there. My curiosity and I would not have written this book had I not traveled there. It just would not have happened. My husband and I ended up traveling there, making 3 trips there. The first trip was a drive-through and very quick, and a very brief stop. And then it was a few years later, the big museum that they have down there, the Gettysburg Museum, the new one, more state-of-the-art, wasn't even built yet. So, but when I walked around the town and the square and the quaint, the original buildings, many of them still there, and then found out through the rangers, the guides, the park rangers, what had actually happened at this house on this street, what Jenny Wade was doing with the women that were left. Women were having, just like Ukraine, women were having babies. You know, the giving birth doesn't stop because there's a war going on. And so thanks for asking about that, Irene. I do like to read in February if given the choice. So thank you, John, because it gives me the opportunity to bring in some work from that book in relationship to Black History Month, and also of the poem I'll read about Whittier, with yesterday being President's Day, Abraham Lincoln. So thanks for that, Irene. And
so Rose,
Irene,
let me jump in here.
Sure.
Rose said, I'm struck by the nuance added by hearing the poet's voice. Interesting and beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Rose.
I think that was a paid political announcement. So Perry, we're gonna need a rebuttal. No, you kidding.
Rosemary. Well, listen, I since my sister is here, I would like to mention her as an example. And she may have done this anyway because she's such a kind-hearted person. This idea of transference. Behind me, I don't know if you could see that very well, I'll move, but behind me is this beautiful quilt. It's pretty big. It's a quilt that my sister made for me after researching Civil War quilts, the Underground Railroad, and the importance and the role that quilts had in helping slaves escape north. And she's a quilter and does a lot of fabric design. She's also an artist and a musician. So there's a poem in the book called She that mentions the quilts. And she said to me, I thought something was going on with that. And so we bounced it around back and forth. And she actually researched a place and some societies. Little known is that like 125,000 quilts were stitched together. The Women's War effort, which came through what they called the Sanitary Commission. So she was able to research and find, so that the beat goes on with inquiry, fabric colors and designs that went with that period. And she gifted me that beautiful, tangible quilt for my birthday not too long ago. So there's an example of how you hope some transference of a thought process or idea, it can become another person's quest and inquiry. I think that's all our hope, that we can send other people on a journey. Irene,
So
That's
let me
nice.
ask you this:
Yeah.
how hard or easy was it to get the stories of the civilian population in Gettysburg? Was there a lot of writing of that history after that event?
There is in Gettysburg, and I did not know this the first time. The first trip, I just came home with sort of superficial, some notes, an inkling that I was going to get back to it. But the second time we went to Gettysburg, I hired a park ranger for a private one-on-one tour, besides going to as many as we could go to. And it was eye-opening. Unfortunately, maybe not. It was raining that day, but I asked him if he asked me again. So there's the inquiry. What do you want to know? What do you want to see? And that particular day, I asked to go up to Little Round Top. So then by the third trip for me was research, and the Adams Historical Society in Gettysburg has tombs of eyewitness civilian accounts. I had been working on the book for a little while on and off. And when I got to that room, because the Adams County Historical Society wasn't open at convenient hours when I was there before, it was like a floodgate. And I just sat there. I sat there for several hours. I wish it could be more, and I mean to go back. And what they did after that war was over, I'm not sure who would have been the catalyst for that. It might have been David Wills. They had the Wills House, and Steven Spielberg donated a lot of money there to get that's the house where Lincoln composed, put the finishing touches on the Gettysburg Address. You could visit that off the square. But yes, eyewitness accounts there are thousands and thousands of books written about the Civil War. And so it wasn't that difficult to mine, except there are still some people that there's not much about them written. So I have some ideas that I'm going to have to keep groping for that.
So go ahead, and then I'm sorry, we had I think this is the longest chat between the first and second half. So it's great though, really great background information. So go ahead and read some poem more. Yeah.
All right. This poem is fitting to me because it hits Black History Month, Massachusetts, and it allows me to make a connection with John Greenleaf Whittier, that he was an elector for Abraham Lincoln's 1860 and 1864 campaign. And And so I think for poets and literature professors, he's known as a fireside poet, but he was one of the founding members of the American Anti-Slavery Society in 1833. And he was born in Haverhill, Mass, and later died in Amesbury, Mass. John Greenleaf Whittier. If you grow up on a farm in rural Massachusetts, and your father tells you to go out and pick ripe strawberries, and you come back with pails full of white ones, so many your parents and country doctor finally deduce colorblindness. I would suspect great compassion from the mother and father was sorely needed, as the farm was barely making it. His listing at Wikipedia: great American, Quaker, abolitionist, poet, and writer. Colorblindness, not at all useful on a farm, made choosing just the right flower or sorting beans a chore, but useful for a history stacked with buckets full of gangrene, a country's highest price, proving itself worthy of making it see.
Nice. Very nice.
Thank you. The next poem, and Irene is probably going to remember this because Irene actually edited the book for me, and she was $1 million worth of help for me on that book. This is where I can highlight questioning or saying something in a poem or asking a question that I normally wouldn't do in polite society, so to speak. I try to keep away from religious and political discussions unless I'm comfortable or feel I know the people pretty well. This poem is called Reconstructing. To all the gods, my queries remained fixed, rising from a doubting youth, unanswerable, I know, inside the land of cotton mouths and lurid cross burnings. But why did you run away? What did you use to cover your ears, shield your eyes when bullets scored and paralyzed your church bells soundless, made death your faithful brethren? And the next poem is not from the book, but I wrote it shortly after the book and it didn't make it into the book. And it is a play on Natasha Trethewey's poem Pastoral from her Pulitzer Prize winning book, Native Guard. And I'll hold this up, Native Guard. Natasha Trethewey, she was also a U.S. Poet Laureate. At the same time, she was state poet laureate from Mississippi. And she grew up in Gulfport, Mississippi. And she's honored as a Black poet, and she identifies as a biracial poet as well. And being it's Black History Month, I thought I would bring this poem more to light. I haven't read this one too much. Trethewey's poem, Pastoral, begins with these two lines. In the dream, I am with the fugitive poets. We're gathered for a photograph. And I borrowed those two lines. An abolitionist memory. In the dream, I am with the freedom seekers. We've gathered at the mill for the final night. Basil Biggs and Mag Palm are whispering directions. The moon is full. I offer meager pieces of bread tied with bonnet ribbon. The ribbon is sky blue. I say, do not lose this ribbon crossing over. When you leave the wind caves, speak no more of it. Throw it at the next station. when nightfall drops, wait for the wagon. It will take you north of Gettysburg toward Yellow Hill. If all goes well, toward Niagara. Trust the roaring river to foresee its future. Hang on.
So, yeah, I like your poems. They're like short and right to the point. You know, they're just like, I like that.
Little stories.
Thank you. Thanks, Irene. And John, I have a very poor attention span, actually. I think that's probably why it sort of led me into art, doing art and making art, which is a pretty solitary thing to do, as is writing. So with my some attention span issues, the short, concise form that poetry is, it really helps me.
Great.
But Theresa, you compiled a major project. I think if you really had a short attention span, would you have been able to stitch all these stories together and do so much research and go back to Gettysburg 3 times? And maybe in some context what you're saying, but that's part of what makes the book so impressive, is how deeply you investigated.
Well, thank you so much. When something grabs me by the shoulders, which I mentioned in the preface to that book, I can stay with it, and also the winters in Buffalo, is where I spend more of my time writing. As far as my writing, if I had a writing style or process, it happens more in the winter. I read, so I ordered all these books, made the trips, and it. And I should say it didn't happen overnight. The poems in the book are a compilation of about 5 years just thinking about it. Not that it took me 5 years to write it, but thinking about it on and off. And we'd make a trip and I'd write a couple more, write down some other other thoughts with that. But I appreciate the comment, and I wanted to mention Natasha Trethewey today and honor her. Time-wise, John, how are we doing? Oh, by the way,
we have 12 minutes left.
Okay, I want to be sure. Some of those poems were on the serious side, but February is also Valentine month. So I wanted to leave. Oh. I didn't leave this room since sitting down here with everyone. So oh goodness. Sorry about that.
All good.
Here it is.
All part of the process.
Yeah. And I have this big desk too. Okay. So February, Black History Month, presidents, thinking about presidents, and then the month of love. So ending with a little bit light here. I have a poem which I have for Robert, Indiana. And I don't think you'll be able to see it, but his beautifully, what a contribution to the world his sculpture, his love sculpture is, that's been interpreted in different countries in different languages. But the word love there I have going down vertical, a letter on each line. For Robert, Indiana, love is layered, dearest, over and under our captive hearts, like volumes of pressed flowers secured in pages of old books that flutter open and fly the way a new fence shakes loose the white of winter before spring.
So Perry said, I've always admired Theresa's work, and I'm sitting here fascinated by how smart she is.
Thank you, Perry. Thanks for the shout out.
And Rose agreed with Irene's comments. So you're.
Thanks, Rose.
I think we have a lot of poetry bias here today, Perry. Buffalo poetry bias. BPB. No, all good stuff.
I've just always liked Theresa's work, but boy, oh boy, the work that goes into it, that's pretty incredible.
Thanks, Perry.
Mine are just about me, that's all. Me.
Well, you know, Perry, I write those too. You know, the narrative, you know, the healing muse. I know you've been in that. And I find that for balance, I think on an emotional level, I need to bounce around quite a bit. You know, Irene and I had many serious discussions about the poems in the Gettysburg book, and she helped me dig a little bit deeper with that. And I have to say, another aspect of inquiry is the revision, editing phase. Another application of inquiry is when you get to when you think the poem is almost done, and I think and Perry, I know you know Carl Dennis, and Irene just last week, Carl Dennis with another Pulitzer Prize winning poet was on the Buffalo Corner reading, and I remember Carl Dennis said in a poem, as far as don't I'll paraphrase. My takeaway was he was saying, you won't know what you're writing about. Possibly you won't know what you're writing about or what the poem is about until you get to your 9th or 10th draft. Now, I don't remember the number that he said, but it did help me sometimes slow down, take a little bit of a closer look. But I do have to balance poems between the ones that require research and ones that poems that can be a little bit more spontaneous and reflective, internal nature poems. There's so much subject matter out there.
But you take history, which is really, really wonderful, and you bring it back to something personal, which is hard to do, and you make it something that other people can understand. I mean, I always tell my students, why write the poem? If people can't identify with it, then why bother write it? And you always do that. I think you always achieve that. Well, I mean, you're not just writing a poem about Gettysburg. You're writing a poem about, you know, your really experience, your relationship with it. That's hard to do.
Well, thank you, Perry. And what I didn't get to mention about the Gettysburg book is that I've had many comments that it trends feminine. So I was able to get into women's history in that book through it. So there's probably somewhere about 32 or 36 people, I think, mentioned in the book. I have to go back. I forget sometimes the data, but it was an opportunity for me to go back into history a different way and tell women's stories and the underrepresented people of the town stories and teenager stories as well. And so that was another goal of that book. But history's always fascinated me, and biography. Ekphrastic poems give me some relief from research for a while, because with a background in art, the ekphrastic poem is really accessible to me. I don't want to say easier, but in some ways it is, because I know I can grasp what I'm looking at, most of the time. But I have a lot of me poems, Perry. Those are in the Healing Muse and all these medical journals that they're out there, and I thank God for them, because I would have a hard time reading some of those, actually, with without getting too emotional.
Mm.
You know, my dementia poems about my dad, for example, poems like that, or my own health issues. But I write a lot of those, and so I bounce around to give relief and some space between the two, and being able to critically think about coming off ekphrastic work and then go back to historical or biography, poems from memory, war. And in the case of Gettysburg War, I did have to get away from that. After that was done, I had to distance myself from it a little bit.
Mhm.
So we only have about 3 minutes left. So you want to quickly go through 2 poems, Theresa?
Well, sure. I have another one that is of the love nature. So, this is the first time I'm reading this. It's called Jasmine Air, and it's a new one. Take the melancholy days down to the cool river of memory, the koi pond where languid fish relax the blurred eyes of reflection will pull you there. Go back and walk the park where lilac bushes morph into the beloved you left behind because you were too young, losing him to convention. Run to that now limited space of recall within the aging mind, perforated by loss and illness. Find the real that shows you strolling hand in hand, pumping your lungs full of jasmine air. Oh, sweet, everlasting oxygen. How you've held it in for decades stuns your loving recollections. There are many ways to breathe.
All right, one finale to close out. Now, Theresa, Perry's going to talk next. Perry's reading next week, so it's his 70th birthday. So you can put your critic's hat on for any Perry's, you know.
I just have to think about how to get rid of this whiteness behind me. How come you people aren't so white?
Well, I think you got to move to a different room.
Yeah, but I don't have all that much room. I'll put some photos back there, a quilt. I'll put a quilt.
Yeah,
back
Theresa
there.
will drive a quilt over to you for
All right.
an official Civil War quilt for the background.
Maybe I could.
Yeah. There's Zoom
Okay,
filters.
good.
Wendy said there are Zoom filters. I don't know what.
I don't know
if that's
what
like
that means.
well, I think it's like a cigarette filter. It's trying to keep the nicotine out of your. No, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't mess with stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well,
Theresa, one more. Theresa, one more quick.
Okay. Seeking victory. Seeking victory. About these variants, there is clarity inside charts and numbers, inside battles and wars, all seeking victory. I've come to understand the multi-headed Hydra, the even harder labors of Hercules. Both of them fire-breathing, slay and conquer. Is ceasefire pending? Will deadly strains move out? All of us crawling, gasping. What now? What now?
Fantastic. Well,
Nice.
thank you for your reading today. And
thank you everyone for coming.
Now, I've been to Gettysburg a couple times myself, and we did the one-on-one park ranger tour. And
right.
Unbelievable. Oh. Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah, really nice.
Yes, that's the way to go. Thank you, Buffalo Contingent, and my dear sister. And Pat, I see Pat there.
Now, Theresa, thank you again. We'll get you the recording. And Perry, we'll see you next week.
Thanks
all right.
to all. Have a great afternoon.
Looking forward.
All right. Take care.
You.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.